friends. Welcome to the Immanuel 10 at 10. I'm doing this video a bit early today because the schools are on a 2-hour delay. I'm going to be taking my kids to school when I normally do this live. It's bitterly cold and windy outside today, so if you're going to venture out in it, bundle up warmly. The entire weekend is supposed to be cold and windy like this. We're still planning to have worship at 8:30 and 10:45 on Sunday, with Sunday school and adult class in between at 9:45. If any of that changes, we'll notify everyone through email, Facebook, and our website, so be sure to check. You can always join us for worship right from the comfort of your home, right here on Facebook as well, if that works better for you. So, in our reading through the Bible, as we look at the One Year Chronological Bible together, we're continuing through the story of Exodus this week. We're nearing the end of the book. Last week, we read about how at the beginning of the book of Exodus, God called Moses to lead the people out of slavery in Egypt. There was the burning bush that God appeared to Moses in, and then the 10 plagues that came down on Egypt when Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Then there was the first Passover, where God rescued the people of Israel from the death of the firstborn that all the other Egyptians experienced by having them paint the blood of a lamb over their doorposts. Pharaoh, of course, changed his mind and chased after them, and they escaped through the Red Sea, and then the whole Egyptian army was drowned. And Moses and Miriam and the people sang the first worship song in the Bible, the Song of Deliverance, that horse and rider God had thrown into the sea. God has triumphed gloriously. Well, this week we heard about how God provided for the Israelites through the wilderness, that he led them with a pillar of cloud and fire. He gave them manna and quail to eat until they got tired of it. But manna was really faith food. They could only gather enough for each day. They had to trust that God would provide each day, because if they kept it, it would go rotten by the next day, except, interestingly enough, on Friday. They could gather twice as much that day, and then on Saturday, there was no manna on the Sabbath because they rested as God had rested on the seventh day. God gave them this gift of Sabbath, and us as well, to remind them that they were no longer slaves. Their lives were no longer defined by their jobs and their slavery. Well, God also provided water for them through the wilderness. He told Moses to strike a rock, and water flowed out from it. And at another point, Moses' father-in-law came for a visit, and he noticed that, that Moses sat down every day and had this long line of people that would come to him for judgment between them. Whenever anybody had an argument with their neighbor or somebody in their family, they would bring it to Moses. And from sun up until sundown, he was deciding all these cases all day long. And so Jethro said to Moses, "What you are doing is not good. You're wearing yourself out and the people too. Why don't you appoint wise leaders over the people in large groups and small groups? Let them hear the cases and decide between people and bring just the most difficult cases to you." So um, Moses did that, and things went a whole lot better because more leaders were willing to share the load. Well, then the people arrived at Mount Sinai, the same place that God had met Moses in the burning bush. And the mountain was covered with thunder and lightning, smoke and fire. There was earthquakes and a trumpet blast. And there at the base of Mount Sinai, God formed them and all of the people that had come with them out of Egypt. He formed them into a community and made a covenant with them. He started off the 10 Commandments by saying, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery and protected you and guided you through the wilderness. Therefore, you shall have no other gods before me. He said, you will be for me my treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They didn't have to do anything to earn their relationship with God. It was just given to them. So God called them to be a kingdom of priests. In Latin, the word priest is pontifex, which literally translates as bridge builder. As Lutheran Christians, we believe in the priesthood of all believers that Luther talked about, that we are all called to build bridges between God and people and between one another. Well, the Ten Commandments that God gave to the Israelites, along with many more laws and commands that expanded on them, were all there to protect their relationships with God and each other. There's really kind of two tablets that the commandments were written on. The first one had to do with all of the commands that protected their relationships with God. You shall have no other gods. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Honor the Sabbath day. Those sorts of things. And then all the rest of them: honor your father and mother. Uh, do not kill or steal or bear false witness. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. All those things were to protect their relationships with each other, to help them thrive as a community. And they are still helpful for us today as well. Now, some of the other laws that it talks about later on to us today seem a little primitive and barbaric. It talks about capital punishment, gouging out an eye for an eye, and so forth. And of course, they seem primitive because they were living in primitive times. But if you compare them with other laws and practices in other cultures at the same time, you see some similarities, but also some remarkable differences. The Israelite Mosaic law shows much more respect to women and slaves and children. It provides justice for them. Um, you know, they weren't just seen as property for the husband or the king to do whatever he pleased with. Everything in there is at least a click forward in uh, more justice, more equality, more living the way God intends us to. Um, Even, an eye for an eye, that was designed to limit the cycle of revenge, because revenge always spirals out of control. And, if you hurt me, I want to hurt you more, and then you want to hurt me more. And they said, no, wait a minute, we're going to keep it even. And this is how it's going to be limited. Um, the Mosaic Law even gives justice to neighbors and even enemies and foreigners. They were to be treated with kindness. He said, do not oppress an alien, for you yourselves know how it feels to be aliens, because you were aliens, foreigners in Egypt. Sabbath is even not just for the people, but even for the land. Every seventh year, they were to allow the land to rest. So it's like some early conservation practices, showing um, honor and providing rest for the land so that it could then produce even more abundantly. They also were given festivals to participate in each year to remind them continually of all that God had done for them. God promised to gradually drive out the other nations from the promised land that they were heading toward. And he gave them warnings not to worship other gods, not to go the way of all those other nations. Well, the Israelites heard all these commands and they promised to do everything the Lord had commanded them. And then Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And then we get these long chapters, long description of how they were to build the Ark of the Covenant, where they would, this special gold covered box in which they would put the Ten Commandments and a jar of the manna to remind them of how God provided for them and what they were called, how they were called to live. It described how to build the tent of meeting and the altar and all of the furnishings, everything that went into this portable temple that they were to carry with them wherever they went. It was where heaven and earth met, where God spoke with Moses, and where Aaron and the priests interceded for the people. God appointed skilled craftsmen who were inspired by the Holy Spirit to make everything. Now, our eyes tend to kind of glaze over a little bit when we hear these long descriptions of how all these curtains and everything else is made. But there's also lots of really important little details woven all the way through that correspond to creation and the Garden of Eden. Lots of the designs had pomegranates and almonds. The lampstand, had 7 lights that were all shaped like flowers to remind them of the 7 days of creation. The priestly garments that Aaron and his sons were to wear had and the high priest had an ephod which with 12 stones on it for the 12 tribes, and Urim and Thummim, 2 sacred lots that they would cast for discerning God's will. So Aaron and his family were set apart as priests, and then we're also given lots of details on how they were to offer sacrifice to make themselves and the people holy, to set them apart for God. Uh, the first 5 books of the Bible are very concerned with how a holy God can dwell among an unholy people, people who so often fell short of what God wanted. And the way that they did that was through sacrificing animals, which again to us seems barbaric, but really an offering, a sacrificial offering, is giving up something that is precious to you. And they were nomadic shepherds, so it made sense that something that would be precious to them is their flocks and herds. In those days, the blood of an animal was seen as the animal's life. And so the sacrificial animal died in their place. It took away their sin, their rebellion against God. Now, much later in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews elaborates on how Jesus is better than Moses, angels, the high priests, the sacrifices, everything that was a part of their religious life as Israelites. Jesus has opened up a way into the most holy place, into God's presence through the curtain of his body. He gave the ultimate sacrifice once for all to reconcile us to God. So up on the mountain, God gave Moses the stone tablets with the 10 commandments. And Moses went down the mountain and found that the people had turned away from God in their impatience. They asked Aaron to make new gods for them, and so he made this golden calf. Moses was furious, and he took the 10 Commandments tablets and smashed them on the ground. He was the first person to make all 10 commandments at once. And then he took the golden calf, burned it, ground it into powder, threw it on the water, and made the people drink it. So this golden calf idol ended up in the latrine. Thousands of people died for their rebellion against God. Then we hear the story of Moses asking God to show him his glory. And God said, "You don't know what you're asking for, Moses, but I will reveal it to you because I know you like a friend." But he hid Moses in a cleft in the rock, and then showed him his back as he went by. One of my seminary professors said, "And on the 8th day, God created the moon." God gives Moses 2 new tablets of stone and sends him back down the mountain with lots more instructions. And when Moses came down the mountain, his face was shining because he had been in God's presence, and it scared the people. So he had to cover it whenever he wasn't. Whenever he spoke from God, he took the veil off his face. But whenever he was finished speaking from God, then he would put the veil back over his face. It's an interesting bit in one of Paul's letters, 2 Corinthians 3, that talks about how Moses had to veil his face, but today we shine with the glory of God with unveiled faces. Ah, so one of the other things that we hear about after all this description of how they were to make the tent of meeting and all of its furnishings, then we get all the description of how they actually made it. And these two guys, Bezalel and Oholiab, along with all these other people, were equipped and inspired to be able to create all this beautiful stuff um, for the temple. We have some amazing craftsmen in our own congregation. Corey and John Mell were some of those who built our new narthex in the church office. David Amundsen designed and built our communion table and our new sound desk and all sorts of other furnishings around our church. And just recently, Mike Mullenbach has volunteered his time to um, create a cross on the ceiling of our narthex, um, so that he was able to save the tiles that were underneath to be able to repair other spots that were damaged by water. So it's a practical solution that also makes our space even more beautiful. Exodus says that everyone gave generously and worked together to build the tent of meeting and all its furnishings. And they had more than enough. Moses even had to tell the people to stop bringing gifts. Well, at Immanuel, we have generous people who give faithfully and provide what's needed, not only for our building and special projects, but for all of our needs and mission as a congregation. I've been amazed over the years to see how, through your gifts, God has provided everything we need. Often, all the funds have been collected even before major projects were finished, like our electrical upgrade a few years ago, our recent technology upgrades, our roof projects, and our recent tuck pointing. God is so faithful to provide. I am so grateful for all of you in your partnership in mission. It seems like God is always out ahead of us, providing for our current ministry and new opportunities like our city serve. It's exciting to see what God is doing in our community. Well, at the end of Exodus, Moses consecrated the tent of meeting and Aaron and his sons, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle like a cloud. And whenever the cloud lifted, the Israelites knew it was time to set out, and God went with them in the pillar of cloud and fire. God goes with us as well. Jesus promised, wherever two or three are gathered, he is there with us. And that's the name of our church, and one of Jesus's names, Immanuel, God with us. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. Hope to see you on Sunday in person or online. Have a great weekend.